Good morning. So today the topic is glimpses of Swami Saradananda. It's a continuation of the talk I gave earlier this morning to the children. Now, I've been doing a series in St. Louis on the monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And the aim is to go to original sources in order to feel as much as possible what it was like to be in the immediate presence of these great souls. There's a Western existentialist philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, who's known as a philosopher, but he was also a hidden mystic. And he said, with respect to his own religion, we must become contemporaneous with Christ, meaning that through our devotion, the barriers of space and time should be dissolved so that we feel that we're in the immediate presence of our chosen ideal of God. So that's the whole point of going to original sources. And what was it like for the people that actually were with them? So we'll start with the end of the story, with a retrospective article on Swami Saradananda that appeared in the October 1927 issue of the Prabhupada Bharata, 2 months after his passing. It was written by, I assume, Swami Ashokananda, who was editor of PB at that time. Swami Saradananda, secretary of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission, passed away at the age of 63 at 2:30 a.m. on Friday, the 19th of August. His death has been a profound and irreparable loss to the order and the innumerable devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. What his death means to the country of India, what a precious asset his life was to the nation, few possibly can truly understand as yet. He lived a life of comparative seclusion, and his activities scarcely appeared in the limelight. But with the growth of the order and the acceptance, the wider acceptance of its principles and methods of work in larger measures by the nation, it will surely come to feel eventually that he was in essence one of the greatest builders of the Indian nation, at the foundation of which he has been silently and steadily working for the last 30 years. What the Ramakrishna mission is today is largely due to Swami Saradananda. The mission, though it derived its ideals and inspiration from other sources, owes its present articulate form mainly to the work of the departed Swami. It is he who worked at it from its very inception, giving the ideals concrete form and linking them to the problems of the passing years, till it has reached its present advanced state of development. The outside world has learned to praise its philanthropic activities, its dynamic ideals, but scarcely knew the man who primarily worked at the details of the institutional machinery. In the meantime, the hearts that receive the gracious touch of his love are desolate. The golden chain that linked their worlds to the eternal is broken, and a window of heaven through which streamed the light of God in their lives seems closed. One of the greatest builders of the Indian nation. This is not hyperbole. Swami Vivekananda saw as one of his primary tasks the regeneration of India along spiritual principles, and a large part of this is the service of God and suffering humanity. This is not social work, but work as a spiritual discipline that uplifts the person who serves first and ennobles the person receiving service as a corollary. Some years ago, maybe 20 years ago now, there was a major earthquake in Gujarat. And I happened to be listening to a story of the aftermath on NPR by a journalist who roamed the world reporting on natural disasters. He'd seen it all. And the surprise and admiration in his voice was unmistakable. He was talking about hundreds of non-governmental organizations streaming into the damaged areas, coordinating among themselves, and picking up the pieces. No histrionics, no woe is me, no pulling of one's hair, just getting to work, helping the afflicted. He said, I've reported on disasters all over the world and never seen anything like it. Swami Vivekananda's ideal of service to God and suffering humanity has been accepted in India, and a large part of that and implemented and assimilated. It's not just the Ramakrishna Mission that does this. There are just uncountable organizations. A large part of that acceptance came from the masterful way in which Swami Saradananda set up the human and institutional machinery of the Ramakrishna Mission as a service organization for the material and spiritual upliftment of India. So we'll be talking about the smaller dimension of his life, but it's important to remember that he had this larger dimension, as does the whole Ramakrishna movement, of having this effect on India, and not just on India, but on the thought current of the world. We'll give a brief sketch of Swami Saradananda's life, and then we go to specific details and reminiscences of different parts of his life and activities. Swami Saradananda came from a rich and orthodox Brahmin family in Calcutta. His pre-monastic name, Sarachandra Chakravarti. He was born the 23rd of December, 1865. From his boyhood, Sarachandra was so quiet that it could be mistaken for dullness. But soon, when he entered school, he showed his extraordinary intelligence in his classwork. In almost all examinations, he topped the list of successful boys. And he took delight in many extracurricular activities and became a prominent figure in debating class, and his strong physique developed through physical exercise attracted notice. His innate, deep religious nature expressed itself in early boyhood. He would sit quietly by the side of his mother when she was worshiping the family deity, and afterwards faultlessly repeat the ritual before his friends. The play that interested him most was to perform imitation worship After he was invested with the sacred thread at the age of 9, he was privileged to do regular worship in the family shrine. He was also strict about the daily meditation required of a Brahmin boy. His nature was courteous. He was not capable of using a harsh word to anybody or hurting anyone's feelings in any way. He had a very soft and feeling heart and lost no opportunity to help his poor class friends as far as his means permitted. The small sum of money, which he was given from home for his meal at school, he often spent for poor boys. Sometimes he would give away his personal clothing to those who needed it more. Relatives and friends, acquaintances and neighbors, servants and housemaids. Whoever became ill, Saradananda was sure to be by their side. Once a maidservant in a neighboring house contracted cholera. She was taken by the family for which she worked to the corner of the roof of the house to prevent spreading the infection and left there to die. As soon as Saradananda came to know, he rushed to the maidservant and all alone did everything that was necessary for her nursing. The poor woman died in spite of his best efforts. And finding that the neighbor was indifferent to her last rites, Sara made those arrangements himself as well. This stayed with him all his life. Whenever any of the brother disciples got sick, he was there by their side. His entire life. They'd go to Udbodhan because that's where he was. And he'd take care of them. He'd make sure they got the best treatment. As he grew up, he came under the influence of Keshava Chandra Sen. He began to study the literature of the Brahmo Samaj and practice meditation according to its directives. In 1882, he passed the university entrance examination and was admitted to St. Xavier's College. Father Lafont, who was then principal, being charmed with the deep religious nature of Sarad, undertook to give him private lessons in biblical study. Sharad and his cousin Shashi, who was living with him for his education, Shashi was from a village, not Calcutta, read in the same college. Once a class friend of Shashi said that there was a great saint at the temple garden of Dakshinaswar. And in the course of conversation, the three decided one day to visit the saint. It was October 1883. Sarat was 17. Sri Ramakrishna received them very cordially. The master asked them to take down and read aloud take down an extract from the Holy Bible, setting forth Christ's opinion on marriage. For there are some eunuchs who were so born from their mother's womb. There are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which are eunuchs for the kingdom of God's sake. He that is able to receive, let him receive. Among those that were in the room that day, one protested, saying, "Do you mean to say, Holy Sir, that marriage is against the will of God?" The master smiled and said, "Don't have to worry about that. Those who like to marry are at perfect liberty to do so." What I had said right now was between myself and these boys. I say what I have to say. You may take as much or as little as you like. It's like, he said it very poetically. He says, I give you the whole tadpole, you can cut off the head and tail. He recognized that Sarak and his cousin Sashi had been Christ's followers during Christ's lifetime. And perhaps that's why he took the Bible down instead of one of the other books which could have given the same message. On another occasion, another visit, the master asked Sharat, how would you like to realize God? What divine visions would you prefer to see in meditation? The young man replied, I do not want to see any particular form of God in meditation. I want to see God as manifested in all creatures of the world. I do not like visions. The master said with a smile, but that is the last word in spiritual attainment. You cannot have it all at once. The boy said, but sir, I won't be satisfied with anything less than that. I shall trudge along the path of religious practice until that blessed state arrives. And the master was very pleased. He said, you will have it. And in later life, there's ample evidence that he did. A few months after this, the master was praising a young man named Narendranath to the skies. He was speaking so highly of him that Sarachandra felt that he should meet him. And he got his address then and there from the master. On meeting Narendranath, he found that he was none other than the young man who had once met in the house of his friend. And at that time, he completely misjudged him. He thought he was arrogant, spoiled, addicted to bad habits, associating with rotten people, and probably the one who spoiled his friend who he went to check on. He found that he was none other than the young man whom he had once met at the house of his friend, ! So great was their attachment or fondness for each other that sometimes Sharat and Narendra could be found in the streets of Calcutta, deeply engaged in conversation as they walked until 1 o'clock in the morning. The intention, they'd be going from one's house to the other. It says, okay, I'll walk you home, we can talk on the way. And then they'd get to Sharat's house and they weren't done with their conversation. Well, let's go back to your house. So they'd get back to Narendra's house and they were still, no, we haven't finished, let's go to your house. They'd go back and forth like this. And finally someone, hey, it's kind of late, maybe we should call it. Sarat Chandra afterwards used to say, however freely Swamiji mixed with us at that very first meeting, not the first meeting, but the first meeting after Ramakrishna sent him there. At that very first meeting, I saw immediately that here was one who belonged to a class by himself. So he understood what a joy it was to be with him, but he also understood what a privilege it was at the same time. The master was glad beyond measure when he heard that Sarat Chandra had not only met Narendranath, but that a deep love had sprung up between the two. He remarked in his characteristic way, the mistress of the house knows which lid goes with which pot. Sarat Chandra was drawn into Ramakrishna's monastic fold. He quit medical school to join the young men who served Sri Ramakrishna when he developed cancer. He took monastic vows in January 1887 with the others and was given the name Swami Saradananda by Narendranath. From 1887, a year after the passing of Sri Ramakrishna, to 1895, Saradananda traveled the holy places in northern and western India as an itinerant monk, practicing hard spiritual discipline. In the meantime, Swami Vivekananda started his work in the West in 1893. In 1895, Swamiji wrote to Saradananda to come to England and then America to help. Before leaving, Saradananda took Holy Mother's counsel about leaving India. And she said he needed her permission and blessing. He wasn't going to go on his own. She said, "My son, don't be afraid. You should go to the West. Sri Ramakrishna will protect you and be with you wherever you go." Okay, Ma, here I go. And then some of you were here when I was speaking to the children. I was elaborating on this incident in Swami Saradananda's life, so I'll go through it quickly. Saradananda used to hold classes regularly in Montclair, New Jersey, where he stayed at the home of a Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler. An interesting incident took place when he was living at this happy home. The Swami had spoken often about his master, Sri Ramakrishna, and one day produced the master's photograph and showed it to the lady of the house. "Oh, Swami, it's the same face." "What do you mean?" She told him that long ago in her youth, before she was married, she had a vision of a Hindu, and that it was the same face she now saw in the photograph. "It was Sri Ramakrishna," she said, "but I did not know it until now. I was so much impressed and charmed at the vision at the time that I remember the face very distinctly, and I've been going here and there ever since I had the vision, whenever I heard that a Hindu had come to America, but until now, always I was disappointed, not finding the same face. And now at last I see it was your master." Referring to this incident, Saradananda later recalled, "The master chooses his own men and women. We're mere instruments in his hand. It is a privilege to work under his banner. In America, he had already prepared the ground for me. I was not alone. He brought to me men and women of exalted character who helped me in our work and bore great love for our master." That's still going on, that hasn't stopped. In 1898, Vivekananda asked Sara to come back to India to help him organize the Ramakrishna Mountain mission. Swami Brahmananda was made the spiritual head of the organization and Swami Saradananda the chief executive. Swami Saradananda served in that capacity from 1898 until his death in 1927. During the early years, the formative years, when Swami Vivekananda was still alive, he once sent Swami Saradananda to Calcutta on an errand. Probably not something terribly important. And when Swamiji learned that it had not been done, he rebuked Swami Saradananda in abusive language, not harsh language. Swami Vivekananda had the ability to invent abusive words that no one had ever heard before on the spot. He, as Swami Ashokananda once wrote, he said, "You've never seen anyone so stubborn as an illumined soul." as an illumined soul. And all of his brother disciples who he wanted to kind of line up to do this work were illumined souls. So to get them in line, he had to do a lot of scolding to get their attention, you know. So he did this with Swami Saradananda. The Swami remained as motionless as a statue under this tirade of rebuke. And when tea was served, not too much later, he began to drink it as if nothing had happened. Disappointed, Swamiji commented, "Sharat's veins carry the blood of a fish. It'll never warm up." Observing that Swami Saradananda was free from anger, Swamiji was very pleased. And his way of showing it was to say, not just once, but several times, "Sharat, your veins carry a frog's blood, or the blood of a sandfish." This is a sign of steady wisdom. And Swamiji knew that this noble even-mindedness is necessary for the executive head of such an organization that was going to do such work. Vivekananda passed away July 4th, 1902, and the responsibilities of the organization and management and of the growing work fell on Saradananda's shoulders. But he always consulted with Swami Brahmananda, the president, when making any decision on serious matters. He also became the caretaker of the Holy Mother and built a house for her in Calcutta that is now called Udbodhan, the Mother's House. From 1909 to 1919, Swami Saradananda wrote the spiritual biography of Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga, a masterpiece of mystical literature. And, you know, Swami Chaitananda retranslated it about 20 years ago. And it's such an unusual book. It's such an unusual book that it got held up in the cataloging process of the Library of Congress because it really didn't fit into any of their pre-existing categories. And we were ready to print it, you know, we needed the cataloging and publication information. So, and they were, you know, so when these things happen, they sometimes open up new categories because they want to be accurate. So anyway, that's another story. We got it out of line and they tucked it into a category, but it's really something special, even for the Library of Congress, who doesn't appreciate, they don't appreciate the the spiritual significance of it. So he wrote this monumental book, partly to pay the debt that he incurred to build Mother's house in Calcutta, and partly to give accurate, detailed, in-depth understanding of Sri Ramakrishna, because a lot of misinformation and partial information was coming out about him at the time. So he did a great service to the world here. And later, after it was all done, he looked at it, he said, you know, he said, I don't know how I wrote that. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. And Vivekananda was asked to write the biography of Swami Saradananda, or Swami Sri Ramakrishna. And he said, no, he says that I can't do that. Sharat will do. This is before he knew. And earlier when they were in London and Max Mueller wanted to write something about Sri Ramakrishna, and both Swamiji and Saradananda were there, he said, why don't you supply him some information? Give him the information that he needs to write the book. So Swami Saradananda did that. And then based on that, Max Mueller wrote his little book. And then Swami Saradananda asked Swamiji, well, why didn't you write the biography? And he said, well, if I'd written it, it wouldn't have been proper. I would have given all kinds of evidence and correlations, even from Christianity, showing that Sri Ramakrishna is the greatest avatar. And it would have blown the old man off his pins. It would have been too much for him. You, on the other hand, haven't thought so deeply about it. So what the information that you gave was suitable. But at the same time, he knew Saradananda was going to write this. So, obviously, Swami Saradananda had time to reflect and understand Sri Ramakrishna in the detail that wasn't readily accessible to him at that time. He was asked later by one of his attendants, Swami Asitananda, if he had experienced Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Swami Saradananda replied, read the chapter in the Lila Prasanga on Samadhi. I've not written anything about Samadhi without experiencing it myself. So this was the verification of Ramakrishna's statement, you will have it, that he made very early on. For the picture of Swami Saradananda's life at this time, we'll go to the reminiscences of Sister Devamata. Laura Glenn, known in our organization as Sister Devamata, was closely associated with the Vedanta work from 1895 when she first heard Swami Vivekananda speak in New York City. I found out about this just recently. She edited the first edition of Jnana Yoga that was published by the New York Vedanta Society after Swami Vivekananda's death, I think. It might have been while he was still alive. Anyway, Swami Vedananda was there at the time. She edited Ellen Waldo's notes of the talk Swami gave in Thousand Island Park that were published as inspired talks. And some of the notes that she took of Swami Vivekananda's New York lectures are in the complete works. So she was part of our organization and an important part. Sister Devamata spent 2 years in India, mostly in South India with Swami Ramakrishnananda. But she spent the last 3 months in Calcutta to be in the blessed company of the Holy Mother. This remembrance of Holy Mother's doorkeeper, Swami Saradananda, appeared in the 1932 Prabhupada Bharata. It was in 1909 that Swami Saradananda started writing the Lila Prasanga. So this reminiscence covers that part of his life. She says, it was my good fortune to meet Swami Saradananda during the 2 years. It was not my good fortune to meet Swami Saradananda during the 2 years of his stay in America. I was then studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, so missed him. But I returned to New York in time to catch the afterglow of his lingering presence. Everyone spoke of him with a tenderness of feeling that told of the great love he had awakened in their hearts. I came in contact with him in Calcutta years later. I saw at once why he had called forth so much love wherever he went in the West. He seemed to possess an exalted gentleness, a graciousness and courtesy which made direct appeal. He was the highest breeding of all, the breeding not merely of manner or culture, but of spirit. It was an outgrowth of divine rather than human relations. It was at Calcutta chiefly that Swami Saradananda passed his days. A room was kept for him at the Bellermont on the Ganges above the city, but he occupied it infrequently. His life was lived in a little room across the hall from the Udboden office. The Udboden being the official Bengali monthly of the Ramakrishna Mission. In the far inner corner of the room, beside a long open window opening onto a central courtyard, he sat cross-legged with a small writing desk in front of him. Hour after hour, he wrote articles for the magazine, a book of his own. We know what that book was. Official letters to friends. Visitors came and he would lay down his pen or pencil only to pick it up again as soon as they were gone. When daylight dimmed and the lamps were brought, the little desk was pushed to one side. Pen, pencil, and thought grew still. The room was always full at this hour, and one of the younger men would read aloud from some holy book. As he read, a choir of sounds mingled with the voice, the trickling of water in the courtyard, the low rumble of a passing cart or carriage in the street, the distant ringing of a vesper bell, the murmur of chant from the room above, but Swami Saradananda heard only the voice telling of divine things. The even course of the Swami's day was broken by two habitual interruptions. The first was a noontide visit to Girish Chandra Ghosh, the famous dramatist and actor. If I remember correctly, he took his noon meal there. It was, as each day I watched him walk along the lane and turn the corner toward Girish Babu's house, that I realized how kingly was his bearing. With all his gentleness, there was something royal in his step and in the way he held himself. Both revealed a nobility of spirit, which bore witness to the fineness of his early training and to the openness of his heart to the influence of Sri Ramakrishna. He and Girish Ghosh were warm friends. They had many points of contact. The foremost was their ardent devotion to their master. Another was a keen interest in literature. The Swami had not the unique and towering genius of Girish Babu, but he possessed a distinct literary gift. And he would share what he was writing with Girish sometimes, and particularly the part of the Leela Prasanga, which dealt with Girish Ghosh. And Girish Ghosh was pleasantly surprised when that portion was read to him, and he realized that somehow Swami Saradananda had nailed it. He just got it right. The second break in the day's routine was the afternoon conference with Yogin Ma. It was at this time that he acquainted himself with Holy Mother's wishes and needs. He was a staunch devotee of the Holy Mother and had this special privilege of looking after her. He it was who accompanied the mother on her journey to and from her village, and it was also he who saw that she was provided with all she required. He did not mount the stairs often to talk with her. His deep reverence and devotion for her seemed to keep him from intruding on the sanctity of her life in those upper rooms set apart from the world. But he sought eagerly every opportunity to hear of her from others. Often he would stop me in the evening as I passed from the courtyard to the entrance door and ask me, what has Holy Mother said today? What has she done? In Calcutta, I saw Swami Saradananda more frequently than any other direct disciple. In the morning when I came from the Nivedita girls' school where I slept to Holy Mother's quarters where I lived. Isn't that wonderful? Mm-hmm. She lived with Holy Mother. Swami would come out from the little room beside the entrance and speak with me. Again at noon, usually we had a few words together, and always at night a few more. Occasionally longer conversation. One morning, instead of coming to the door to greet me, he called me into his office. There was an air of distress about him which troubled me. His first words deepened the impression. "Sister, you will not mind if I tell you something," he said. And he repeated the question several times before he explained. The previous day, when Radu had overturned a goblet of water on her new meal, I had just rushed forward, wiped it up without thinking. And he explained to me that this might have an adverse effect on her marriage because of casseroles. Oops. It was my only offense against caste, and fortunately it did not have the feared effect. But the chief value of the incident to me lay in what it showed me about how reluctant the Swami was to speak the least word that might wound or offend. On another day, we sat in the Ubodan office and talked for a long time of the mother's dream of establishing a girls' school on the Ganga, where Eastern and Western girls might study together. They would be housed separately, but mingle freely and exchange their various aptitudes. She had given me the task of making this dream a reality, and Swami Saradananda wished to go over the details with me. So it didn't happen, as you know. After this trip, Sister Devanath Mata didn't get back to India. And Holy Mother has said to her as she departed, she said, be careful, my daughter. She said, if you get the hem of your garment in the American work, you won't be able to come back. She wanted to, but she didn't. So let's talk about Swami Saradananda's relationship with the Holy Mother. And this is from Swami Seshananda's book, Glimpses of the Great Soul. The Great Soul being Swami Saradananda. Did any of you ever meet Swami Seshananda? No. Seated in a small downstairs room at the Ubodan house, the Swami regulated Holy Mother's visitors. Sometimes he jestingly introduced himself to strangers as her doorman. Assuming the responsibility for her care, it involved not only looking after Mother's person, but her family, 4 or 5 monastic members when she was at Jairambati, and at all times her 3 nieces, who were eccentric and infirm. Radhu's protracted illness had cost the mother heavily, draining her slender and unstable income. Most of her devotees were from middle-class family, and regardless of their desire to help with donations, they could not donate liberally. Finally, Swami Saradananda wrote to Sarah Bull in Boston, who he knew very well because he lived in her house. He held conferences there in Boston for help. And immediately, Sarah Bull arranged to send 250 rupees a month for Mother's expenses. Once, Holy Mother told Swami Arupananda, I shall be able to be at the Ubodan as long as Sarat is there. I don't see anyone else who can be responsible for me after that. Sarat can in every respect. He is the man to bear my burden. Arupananda asked if Swami Brahmananda could look after her needs. No, my child, that is not his temperament. He's cast in a completely different mold. It's difficult for him to bring his mind down to meet situations of a complicated nature. His mind naturally soars very high. He can look after me mentally or attend to my needs through someone else. What about Swami Premananda? No, he can't either. But he's running Bellar Mother. That may be. But looking after women is a bother. He can keep an eye on me only from a distance. Yet when Swami Saradananda was writing the part of Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga that dealt with his tantric worship, he felt he didn't have the needed depth of understanding. And he took instructions in Tantra from his cousin Sashi's father, who was an adept in Tantra. And through that instruction and spiritual practice, he got the needed background that he felt he needed for that portion of the Lila Prasanga. But as a result, he also came to the point where he saw the Divine Mother in all women. So this was another special quality that he had. Holy Mother called her Sharat, her Vasuki, the mythical snake who protected her with 1,000 hoods. If anyone tried to persuade Mother to go to Calcutta when the Swami was absent, she would say, "There can be no question of my going to Calcutta when Sarat is not there. To whom shall I go? Suppose I'm in Calcutta and Sarat says that he wants to go elsewhere for a few days. Then I say, wait a little, my child. First, let me leave this place, then you may go." In her last days, she was heard to remark, "I'm tired of this embodied life. I shall now depart, taking Sarat in my arms and carrying him wherever I go." When the Swami heard her words, he wept like a child. In 1919, the Swami wrote a long letter to the Mother describing the suffering of people throughout India from the combined problem of terrible famine and must have been the 1918 influenza epidemic. He sought Mother's blessings and prayed to her that the mission would get the necessary funds from the public for the needed relief activities. Hearing his letter, Mother burst into tears and with a choked voice said, "I cannot bear the suffering of the people anymore. Oh Lord, may you be pleased to do something for them. Be kind enough to put an end to their sorrow and pain." Then she looked at the devotees seated around and said, "Have you seen the heart of Sarat? You will not find another person with such a big heart as Sarat's, excepting surely Narayan's. There may be illumined souls, knowers of Brahman, but you will not find another man in India or elsewhere so kind, so compassionate, so generous as you see in the personality of Sarat. His heart cries for the suffering of humanity. He is like the great protector, protecting people with food, shelter, and clothing. Whatever may be their needs, none can be compared to him. As his heart is big, So his love is vast and all-embracing. Another day she said, just see, Sarad. She always called him Sarad. He was her child. She wasn't going to let him grow up and be a big Swami. One day, she said, just see, Sarad. See how much work he is doing, how many burdens he's bearing on his shoulders. But he does not whisper a word of complaint. His mouth is shut. He's a true holy man. Why should he bother about all these things? Men like him, if they wish, can easily sit quietly and concentrate on God, devoting their time to meditation for hours on end. Why do they not do that? It is only for your good that they bring their minds to a lower plane and engage themselves in all kinds of activities for the sake of suffering humanity. Now, for Swami Saradananda's part, he implicitly obeyed every one of Mother's instructions and carried out unquestioningly her wishes, with one exception. It happened this way. In 1920, the mother was stricken with Kala-Azar, a dangerous and painful fever-ridden disease. Her doctors had described a bitter Western medicine to be taken several times a day and a bland diet consisting mainly of barley water and milk. She followed this regime without complaint for a very long time, but finally it caused her to lose both her appetite and her patience. She scolded her attendant, Saravadevi. You know just two things. Bring the thermometer and bring the barley water and milk. Coaxing me to drink more and more. I'm tired of all this. She asked one of her nieces to buy her some muri and fried food. And so, you know, the mixture, muri and the hot mixture, fried in mustard oil, which Charambadi people are very fond of, which we have for breakfast, actually. But which is extremely harmful to a patient with Kala-Azar. When the food was brought to her, she gave some to the niece who had brought it and put the rest in a cup for himself. She was about to savor the food fried in mustard oil, when Swami Saradananda appeared in the room. One of her attendants had run downstairs for help, and as he climbed, see, this is the genius of Swami Seshananda. He's telling this story, and he's telling it in the way that English is used in the West. I just love it. One of her attendants had run downstairs for help, and as he climbed the stairs, he wondered how he was going to say no to the Holy Mother. And yet a sense of responsibility for her welfare compelled him to do just that. Seeing him coming, Holy Mother hid the cup behind her back and said, "My dear child, why have you come? What can I do for you?" The Swami, who had entered her presence with folded hands, knelt before her, saying, "Ma, I've come for a purpose that I beg you to fulfill. I request you to give me the cup that is behind your back." All of your children downstairs, including me, will eat its contents with joy, and we will fill it for you again once you're well. At first, Mother, like a little village girl holding on to her favorite thing, didn't want to give it up. But she finally did, with the knowledge that Sarah was asking for it only because he loved her. So now we'll go to the specific reminiscences of Swami Seshananda, who was Swami Saradananda's private secretary and personal attendant from 1921 until his passing in 1927. And he started this book, Glimpses of a Great Soul, with the featurized lead. He said, even though Swami Saradananda weighed 190 pounds and I weighed 115, he always called me his bodyguard. I can't go to Bellarmont without my bodyguard. So you can see the relationship that developed between them. Some people called him Swami Saradananda's shadow. It was smaller. It was 1917. I was a student at St. Paul's Christian College in Calcutta with no thought of becoming a monk whatsoever. But I had heard of Sri Sarada Devi, the widow of Sri Ramakrishna, and a great holy woman in her own right. So I was interested when my friends brought me the news that she had come to Calcutta from her rural village, Jairambati. On impulse, I went to the Ubodan house where she was staying with some of my friends on the day when male devotees could pay their respects and receive her blessings. And he did. I don't know. I don't think it was this day. It might have been. I don't remember exactly. Again, on impulse, he said, Mother, please bless me with initiation. Okay. And then later on, and this is, I'll get back to the story. Later on, when he was, much later, when he was Swami Saradananda's personal secretary, and taking letters from him, taking dictation from him, writing letters, and seeing what pains he went to give his initiated disciples explicit directions on the things that they should do in their spiritual life, specific spiritual instruction. And he'd done this for some time, and he said, well, Maharaj, could you give me some specific instructions? Holy Mother didn't, and this was after Holy Mother had passed, Holy Mother didn't, give me such detailed instructions. And Swami Saradananda responded, you are the greatest fool. Don't you know our Holy Mother is the Divine Mother herself? Just do what she said. Your success is assured. You don't need these little things from me. You've gone to the Divine Mother. You are the greatest fool. After a wait in the Ubodan, now, meanwhile, in the Ubodan here, after a wait, a monk told us that we could go upstairs to see Mother. We prostrated before her and touched her feet. Afterwards, we came downstairs and began talking with Swami Pirananda, a senior monk. While we were talking, I heard a voice call out from the next room, let the boy who has left his shoes on the threshold come here. Since I was the boy who had left his shoes on the threshold, I rose, followed the voice through the doorway. There, dominating the room, was the large, imposing figure of Swami Saradananda, my first view of him. Do these shoes belong to you? Yes, Maharaj. Why have you left them on the threshold? You should have put them where they belong, below the staircase. Keeping them at the doorstep could cause inconvenience to others. They could trip and fall. You should be more careful. Those words given force by the Swami's somber appearance cut me deeply. And out of fear, I avoided him for the next 4 years. Staying away from the Boden house unless Holy Mother was there. Instead, I often went to Balaram Mandir to see Swami Brahmananda. I believe that Swami Saradananda used harsh treatment to impress me with the need of responsibility. He was the embodiment of responsibility and the precision that brings orderliness to the inner life as well as the outer life. I believe he saw my future and knew that I would have to be responsible for a large spiritual family and alert to the welfare of others. Holy Mother's departure from Calcutta for her village home in Jairabadi put me in a quandary. Without her presence, now keep in mind, he was a student at this point, he hadn't joined the order. Without her presence, my fear of Swami Saradananda prevented me from visiting the Udbodhan house and receiving the benefit of the monks that lived there, their advice and example. In my perplexity, I turned to Holy Mother for help, praying silently. "O Mother, your name is Abhaya, bestower of fearlessness. Please remove this fear which is troubling me so much." Like most prayers, its fulfillment took time and came in increments. First, by the Holy Mother's grace in 1921, I was able to join the Ramakrishna order. Then destiny in the form of malaria sent me back to the Udbodhan house to act as assistant to the office manager. Once there, I began hearing stories of Swami Saradananda's compassionate heart from those who worked under his direction. But I still felt uneasy and went way out of my way to avoid him. One day, the Swami called me to his upstairs room. His stern look gone, in a sweet voice, he asked, "Would you be able to write letters for me? I will dictate, and you will write. I will sign after reading what's been written. But you must not divulge the contents of the letters to anyone, not even your best friend." My fear vanished. And that was the beginning of my association with Swami Saradananda as his private secretary and personal attendant. As I write, my mind goes back to the years 1921 to 27, when I lived with the Swami in Calcutta. In memory, I see him enter the shrine at the Udbodhan house and prostrate in front of the portrait of Holy Mother before returning to his room to become absorbed in meditation. Once again, I hear his voice as he dictates and watch him sign the completed letter in his careful hand. I relive the time when, in replying to a request for spiritual instructions, the Swami had me write, quote, "I am dictating this letter to a person who would never divulge its contents, even at the cost of his life." Even now, that memory sends a thrill through my body. I came to love and respect him. In him, I found all that was great and true. He was a living exemplar of the teachings of Vedanta. And then he talks about his special role in the Ramakrishna order, which is kind of off the subject. I'm going to tie it up with Swami Seshananda's description of one thing that Swami had narrated to him, and then his demise. Swami Saradananda rarely mentioned his personal spiritual experiences and did not describe them in detail. One of the few exceptions about which anything is known occurred in 1896 when the Swami visited Rome on his way to London. The elaborate Mass in St. Peter's Cathedral interested him, but did not affect his mood. On his way out, he saw a statue of the Virgin Mary and stood in front of it for a long minute. Then he quietly sat nearby, meditating. He lost all outer consciousness. The world disappeared. His mind was filled with joy, and the radiance of love enveloped his being. In his inner vision, he saw the cathedral being supported not by pillars, but by the figures of saints shining with effulgent rays, which penetrated to every corner of the building, filling it with holiness and spirituality. And in the midst of the saints stood the Virgin Mary, holding her divine child in her arms. And as he looked at the mother and child, the Swami felt the presence of Christ in his heart. Conversation continues. Once when Sri Ramakrishna had been talking to his devotees about Christ, the messenger of life, he went into an ecstatic state, an exalted state of consciousness. When he came down a little bit and could speak, he said, Sarad and Sashi, in a former incarnation, were disciples of Christ. They belonged to his very close and intimate family. The Bengali phrase which the master used was Rishi. Rishi Krishna Dalar Lok. Dalar Lok can be translated as follower, but Swami Saradananda's experience in St. Peter's Cathedral suggests he was very close to Christ, because that experience was not of an ordinary type. So this is Swami Seshananda's interpretation. So this is his last days. On the 6th of August, 1927, Swami Saradananda followed his regular routine, taking his morning bath, meditating 3 hours in his room, and then going to the shrine to prostrate before the pictures of the Master and the Holy Mother. On that day, he was a person of very regulated habits. On that day, he stayed in the shrine for half an hour. Then he came to the exit door and again returned to the shrine, repeating this unusual behavior a few times. Standing in front of the Holy Mother's picture, he silently prayed. When he finally came out of the shrine, Saradananda's face was glowing with joy and serenity. It is said that during her last illness, Mother said, I'm tired of this embodied existence. I shall now depart with Sharat in my arms and take him wherever I go. I went to his room in the late afternoon and he dictated letters for an hour and a half. The bell for Vespers rang, and as I was about to go to the shrine to join my brothers in singing Kandana Bhava Vandana, when the Swami asked me to wait and finish all the letters before I left. He read each letter carefully and signed each one. I took the letters and mailed them. After Vespers, Swami Hari Premananda and I went to the Swami's room, and we found him half reclining on his bed, struggling to rise, but unable to do so. He said to us, don't tell anyone, don't make any noise. I will go downstairs to meet the devotees soon. Vaikuntanath Sanyal, who had come into the room by now, asked me to call Dr. Ghosh. When the doctor arrived, he told us to put an ice bag on the Swami's head and change it every 5 minutes. I went by streetcar immediately to buy new ice bags, and by the time I had returned, Udbodhan was crowded with monks from Bellarmont who had come to render service to their beloved Swami. We learned that he'd suffered a stroke and that there had been damage to his brain. He retained consciousness, but his speech was impaired. A few days later, the Swami could only smile in response to Dr. Ghosh's question, "Sharad, would you like to drink tea?" Another day, he had to use his left hand to drink the Charanamrita from a spoon. All three systems of medication, Western, homeopathic, and Ayurvedic, were tried with no visible result. But even without speech, Swami Saradananda continued to transform the lives of those that came to see him. When the homeopathic doctor came to treat the Swami for the first time, the Swami looked at him and the doctor's agnosticism vanished. He became an ardent devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. It was the anniversary of Sri Krishna's birth, 19th August 1927. The Swami's condition rapidly worsening, all hope gone. At 1 p.m., we began to chant Hari Om Ramakrishna. And in the midst of our chanting, the Swami drew his last breath. We all chanted, that invisible is infinite, this visible also infinite. This infinite has been projected from that infinite, and when this infinite merges into that infinite, all that remains is infinite. Peace, peace. So there's so much information I couldn't begin to give all of it. Just some of it, but I just love doing the research on this.
That's wonderful.
So I want to, if I've got another 5 minutes, I want to read you something that I wanted to include but didn't. It's chapter 8. It's from chapter 8 of Swami Seshananda's book, entitled Swami Saradananda's Sense of Humor. Sadhu, writer, editor, nurse, lecturer, administrator, educator. Swami Saradananda was also a joyful man. No one could be around him long without becoming caught up in the fun he initiated or discovering his sense of humor. In addition to teasing Swami Seshananda, Swami Saradananda loved to joke on himself. He used to tell the story of the time when he was living at Varanagore Monastery and had to go out begging for food, as was the custom in northern India after taking the vows of sannyas. I went to a house and chanted Om Namah Narayanaya, according to custom. A lady opened the door, looked at me with careful eyes, and said, "You have such a stout, robust body. Are you not ashamed to come begging? Can't you get a job as a street conductor and support yourself at least?" And immediately slammed the door in my face. The sound of the Swami's hearty laugh as he narrated that story still rings in my ears, bringing with it memories, not of the grave, somber-looking man of his photographs, but a face lighted with fun and delight. Sometimes we young monks would say to a Swami of our age with a robust constitution, "Young man, can't you get a job as a streetcar conductor and support yourself?" The young Swami would understand our joke, for he'd been present at the time of the narration, and there would be great fun among us. What you learn in pain, you teach in song. Through fun and great humor, these great souls teach us many things that abstract philosophy and sermons preached with great preparation cannot. We must trust in the permanence of spirit and accept life as a great fun. Christ has said, "My burden is light, my yoke is easy." If we can cultivate a little humor in our dark days, we will find spiritual life neither boring nor dry, but sweet and encouraging. Association with these great souls helps us to do this through their precepts and through their art of spontaneous living. Great fun.
Alright. When his name was, sannyasi name was given, it wasn't thought that he will be taking care of mother. So how nicely he got the name.
Yeah.
Only, I just think only Ramakrishnananda name was given because he was so much into Thakur's puja and he was so.
And Thakur's service.
Service.
He did not practice spiritual disciplines because it would take him away from the direct service to the master. And he asked about visions and all this ecstasy once, kind of, he said other people are getting it, I'm not getting it. And Ramakrishna told him, well, if you get those things, you won't be able to serve me. So I don't want them then. I want to serve you. So yeah. So that was very conscious decision on Vivekananda's part, but what went through his mind when he gave Saradananda the name of Saradananda?
Thakur knew that he's going to take care of mother.
Yeah, of
he
course.
checked him out, yeah. But maybe he told Swami even also.
And maybe Thakur was just working through him. Maybe the mother was working through him. That's what happened. Okay, you've got Nirvikalpa Samadhi, now I've got the keys, I'll give them back to you when you've done mother's work. Then you can have your cherished desire, but not before. Anyway, any other questions or comments?
It's profound, Maharaj. The way you narrated. Thank you.
Yeah. I can just hear Saradananda telling Swami Aseshananda, you are the greatest fool.
Yeah.
he meant it very kindly. But, you know, in those days, it wasn't conventional wisdom during Holy Mother's life or shortly after that she was more than the person who happened to marry Sri Ramakrishna. It wasn't common knowledge. Yes.
Swamiji, is it known? So there were two highly educated gentlemen like Narayan and Sharat, right? Talking, debating with each other, walking back to each other's homes. They were perfectly bilingual, probably trilingual with Hindi or some, of course, Sanskrit. But is it known whether they had these debates in Bengali or in English? And then when they wrote things down, was it in Bengali and then later translated into English? I'm just asking in order to understand certain philosophical concepts, if they are translated accurately from, I only speak properly in English, so I don't know whether the original would have been different.
Yeah, well, these discussions that they had as college students walking back and forth between each other's houses, I think they were discussions, not debates. You know, they were sharing ideas and trying to figure out who this madman of Dakshinaswar really was, and what he was about, and sharing experience. I think it was more kind of mutual discovery, having someone of great intelligence and insight with whom they could share these challenging experiences and ideas. I think it's just kind of a recognition that this is a special person in my life that I can talk to like this. And I would assume that they spoke in their mother tongue. I would assume that. I have no reason to suspect that that's not the case. And that among themselves they spoke Bengali, and they wouldn't speak English unless someone who didn't understand Bengali was around.
Thakur out of fun beside there that just Swami speaking in English. He was very interested to hear that, so he will force him that, you know, I'll go in English, I'll go in English. But Swamiji will not
English.
do
Yeah.
Swamiji will not do it. So I guess that they used to talk in Bengali, yeah, all the time.
So, anyone else? It creates a mood. See, this is the whole purpose. This is the whole purpose of this type of talk, to leave us in this mood
Yes.
of blessedness and having been that close to their company. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's an exercise in being in holy company. We're in the company of Swami Saradananda, but then we're also in the company of Sister Devamata, in the company of Swami Saradananda, in the company of Swami Gambhirananda, from whose biography I read initially, in the company of Swami Ashokananda, because it's coming through them. It's coming through their narration, but it's firsthand. It's firsthand. And it's so much more meaningful when it's firsthand, because when Swami Aseshananda is writing those words, he's reliving those experiences and feeling this thrill run through his body. You know, someone who will not divulge the contents of this letter, even at the cost of his life. So much faith in this boy. And to think that Swami Seshananda spent so many years in America, didn't go back to India even.
He
Just,
passed away here.
yeah,
It's also very interesting. He was very interesting.
pretty special. So, okay, we can't, we have to get on to more important things,
Maharaj, Maharaj, thank you, Maharaj. When you said you will talk about Saradananda, and I was like, wow, because I am going through the Leela Prashango again and read it before. And it's wonderful, like how he wrote, how he lived, like, this is
Oh, that reminds
whatever
me.
he sinned, whatever he heard, he wrote, and so nice.
No, the depth of understanding that we get of Ramakrishna is to be able to write about those things with such clarity
Yes.
and in such an inspiring way at the same time. It's a divine gift to us, really. And after I had prepared this lecture, we got gift copies of a book that was just published, written by Vandana Jani. It's called Rolling River Free, about Swami Saradananda's 2 years in the West exclusively. It's 800 pages. And her husband, Mahendra, told me, she said, if there was a day when she couldn't dig up from her research what Swami Saradananda did on that day, she'd lose sleep on it. So she worked for 6 years on this, and then it's now available. It's called Like Rolling River Free. I think it's available on Amazon.
Yes, Maharaj. $34.
Yeah, it's not cheap. So there's more information on it now. There's more information about his work in America. He went to Chicago. No one knew he went to Chicago. She found it out. They thought he just worked on the East Coast, but he traveled quite a bit. Extremely busy. Okay.
Maharaj, yes, I think the lunch is ready.
I'll just go
I'll just
upstairs.
check and,
Yeah.
Maharaj, you just come.
Yeah.
I think it. Maharaj, yes.
We'll make you stay.
Okay, okay.
Sorry, you need to go.
That's what we say, Shanada would say, okay, okay. Okay, 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 okay.